Hello, I am Emily Andrews. I'm a second year master's student at the University of Buffalo, and I am presenting here on behalf of my co authors, Yotam Ophir, he's a professor at UB as well, and Dror Walter, who is also a professor at Georgia State University. And my title is Let the Data Tell Their Stories, a mixed method approach for analyzing alleged vaccine injuries narratives. So, first, a little bit of background. Vaccine hesitancy isn't really a new phenomenon. Measles remains a risk to Americans due to pockets of vaccine resistance all around the country. And to the right is a graphic of a measles virus. In 2019 alone, the CDC documented well over 1,000 measles cases in the US, and many of these individuals were not vaccinated against measles, mumps, and rubella. And because of this, a lot of people look to parents who may not choose to vaccinate their children because of various beliefs and whatnot. So they find themselves under a lot of criticism. However, that criticism can backfire because it can lead to a heightened polarization among, the anti-vax community versus other individuals. So the goal of our study is to better understand why parents believe vaccine misinformation and how they talk about it online. So, despite being one of the most important and life saving innovations in medical history, vaccines have been under criticism since they came out. And this is shown with this illustration to the right, which shows some criticism against the smallpox vaccine. And this misinformation is especially prevalent online. And some of this discussion includes concerns about maybe the danger of the vaccines, including the safety of them, whether they are safe or not because of things like their ingredients. There's a lot of discussion about them vaccines having sort of different toxic ingredients and whatnot. And there's also discussion about sort of a risk and benefit analysis. And we think this is important because MMR misinformation and hesitancy can spill over potentially to more unfamiliar vaccines like the COVID-19 one that's currently being developed. So, another important element to this story is personal narratives. So, vaccine misinformation is often embedded within personal stories. And we know from previous literature that misinformation that's embedded within narratives can be particularly hard to debunk because misinformation within narratives has this sort of causal nature to it. We know that narratives are really emotionally engaging. There are elements like identification with characters, etc. So, in other words, stories can blame vaccines for various injuries and diseases by emphasizing a causal chain of events. So, for example, a child was healthy, they got vaccinated, and then they were diagnosed with autism. However, we can't just simply correct this misinformation because it creates a mental gap in people's understanding of events, which can then lead them to fall back on misinformation. So, a lot of the time, it's easier to simply rely back on the misinformation than have this uncomfortable gap in a chain of events, which causes a cognitive dissonance of sorts. So essentially, what's happening is, well, if the vaccine isn't to blame, then why did my healthy child become unhealthy? Or what caused the autism? They were perfectly normal before. So, in order to look into this, we gathered a corpus from followingvaccinations.com. And we think that looking into these narratives in particular is important because parents worldwide on this website can post anonymous brief accounts of vaccine-related harm to their children in their own words. And this sort of analysis seems to remain rather scarce within the current literature. So in order to analyze the narratives that we gathered from this website, we use topic modeling, which is a data-driven, inductive, unsupervised machine learning. And what I mean by that is that we gather all of these narratives, we put them into the machine, and we sort of let the algorithm take over, and we don't interfere with how the algorithm sorts out topics within the narratives. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So, broadly, topic modeling is on the assumption of co occurrence. So, words that appear together in the same stories should share thematic meaning. We input parent stories in a number of topics. And in this case, we chose a model of 20 topics based on other fit indicators. And then in the output, we have topics, which are essentially distribution lists of words that tend to occur together. So here's a little visual that shows this rather nicely. So here we have, for example, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. This yellow right here is one topic, the red is another, green is another topic, and then blue is yet another topic. And within these, there are lists of words. And for each word, there's a loading, which is essentially the likelihood that this word, for example, Congress here, will belong to the yellow topic. And for here, here's drug, so this is the likelihood that drug will belong to the red topic. And the important part here is that each narrative within our corpus is a mix of all of these different topics, although some topics may be more prevalent than others. So for our corpus, we have a word cloud here of the top 200 words after removal of stop words like the, and we see the number one word is sun, which makes sense because we see that with autism diagnosis, it seems that boys tend to be diagnosed much more frequently than girls. And we're not really sure why that is. It could be because of the measures used to diagnose autism. Perhaps they're maybe geared a little bit more toward stereotypical boy-ish behavior. So it could be that the measure is flawed, or it could be that it truly is just more prevalent among boys, but we don't necessarily know. And the second most frequent word here is months, which is really huge because it emphasizes this idea of temporal proximity. So, this idea that a child is healthy, vaccinated, and over time, after being vaccinated, they start to develop these issues, whether it's behavioral problems, rashes, whatever. So, here are 20 topics. There's quite a few. So what we did was we tried to break them down into different categories, which I'll go into. There we go. So the first one is topics demonstrating causal chains. This focuses more on regression. So for example, one of our topics here is regression from normal behavior, which includes words like stopped, head, day, eat, night. And the two examples here are two separate narratives from the corpus that we pulled from the website. So, for example, MMR at 14 months, screaming started, stopped saying dada, now my son is 3, still screams, etc. So, again, there's these bolded words are important because they emphasize this causal chain of events. Next, we have topics demonstrating evidence of harm. So, for example, one of these is allergies and infections. So, we see words like ear developed infections. And here's another example that we pulled from our corpus. So, this is one entire narrative. So, my son, born in 2005, received the standard new word vaccines at these weeks. And then within 48 hours, right away, he developed severe infected eczema, had itchy patches. My unvaxxed daughter has never had eczema and was not ill as a baby or toddler. So again, we see this sort of idea of causality. And the third category here are topics demonstrating distrust in doctors and medical professionals as a whole. So we actually have a topic called distrust in doctors, which includes words like doctor, shots, time. And in this example, there's a lot of focus here on the child, and then the doctor's saying, well, it's purple crying, but, the parent insists that, well, I knew the difference. I knew that it wasn't necessarily what was going on. I repeatedly asked the doctor to, do XYZ, and it took a long time to receive the medical help that we needed. So overall, what does topic modeling reveal in this instance? As I stated, there are patterns of narrative causality where a child is healthy, vaccinated, and then they start to have problems. And our categories of regression really emphasize temporal proximity. Our evidence of harm categories emphasize post-vaccine problems like rash, screams, etc. We also see a lot of discussion about toxins or poisons. So there's that element of being concerned about the safety of vaccines. And lastly, with distrust in doctors and medical professionals, there's a focus on miscommunication between them, between parents and doctors, that is, and other vaccine ingredient concerns. Of course, no study is without limitation. So we only looked at one website here, and we only got about 1,400 narratives, which is good, but I think it would be helpful to look into more. And further, with this website, there's a gatekeeping feature. So stories may be subject to the editor's review. The editor may choose not to post them. Next, users are told, please, if you could say in about 4 to 6 sentences what the vaccine was, how they reacted, how they are today, and what city the vaccine was administered, although we removed the city from our data. Still, stories may have been prompted a bit to use a causal structure. So it's not enough to just take these results and say, okay, great, there's causal structure within all of these narratives that parents are posting on the internet. So we would need to look into more websites. However, despite these limitations, we demonstrate the centrality and prominence of temporal causality within parents' arguments that vaccines have injured their children. So this sort of evidence of harm over time after being vaccinated is their evidence of harm. Future studies should examine the effects of these causal structures and ways to debunk misinformation. However, that's really difficult because simple corrections that just say, well, the information is false, doesn't really work because like I mentioned earlier, it allows people to just fall back on that misinformation. So providing an alternate explanation would be really important moving forward. So that's something that I would be interested in doing. That is it. So thank you very much for watching my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions. And I also left my email here, and it's in the Google Doc. So feel free to email me as well.